Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a single human behavior fasting, and we're going to unpack it completely. If your understanding of fasting pretty much begins and ends with, the 168 hashtag on social media or the latest diet craze, you're about to discover a practice that is so much more profound.
It really is.
I mean, it's rooted in ancient safety protocols, sacred religious rites, and some of the most dramatic moments of political resistance in world history.
Yeah, and it's so often viewed just through that modern metabolic lens, but the comprehensive sources we've looked at for this really reveal it as this universal human tool.
Right.
We're moving beyond the biohacking headlines to explore its role in medicine, the real science of that metabolic switch, its specific life-threatening risks, and its incredible power as a nonviolent social weapon.
And that's our mission for you, the learner, to gain a comprehensive, clear, and frankly, a surprisingly complex understanding of fasting, one that connects the cellular chemistry of survival to the ultimate display of human will.
And as always, we should start with a precise definition. Before we get into these long, extended fasts, let's nail down what it even means physiologically.
Good idea.
Because we all enter a fasting state every single day. Physiologically, fasting just refers to the metabolic status that follows the complete digestion and absorption of a meal.
Which usually takes, what, 3 to 5 hours?
About 3 to 5 hours, yeah. Or more practically, it's the state you're in overnight, before you literally break your fast with breakfast. It's all about the body's response to not having any incoming calories.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's start where fasting is completely non-negotiable in clinical practice.
Right.
It is absolutely standard protocol in medicine, but usually for two very specific safety-critical reasons.
The first one, as our source material notes, is all about prevention. Fasting is almost always required before any kind of surgery or procedure that needs general anesthesia. The protocol is strict, no food or drink for a certain period.
And the reason is quite literally life-saving. It's to prevent something called pulmonary aspiration.
Exactly. When a patient is under deep anesthesia, their protective reflexes, like the gag reflex, are suppressed.
They're turned off.
They're turned off. So if they were to vomit stomach contents, they could aspirate that material, inhale it right into the lungs, and that can cause a severe life-threatening pneumonia.
So it's a critical safety measure.
Yeah.
Just a few hours of not eating can be medically essential.
It really can. And the second standard medical use is diagnostic. Fasting is required to establish a true metabolic baseline.
Like before a blood test.
Precisely. If you need a lipid panel for your cholesterol or certain blood glucose measurements, you'll be asked to fast. This is to make sure the results show your body's long-term, steady metabolic state, not the temporary spike from that latte you just had.
The sources also talk about something called a diagnostic fast, which is used more for investigation. These are longer, ranging from a few hours up to 100 hours, depending on the person.
Yeah, and I have to stress, these are highly supervised.
I would imagine so.
Absolutely. They're done under constant observation, usually in a hospital, and they're used to investigate really complex health issues like hypoglycemia, pathologically low blood sugar.
So the doctors are trying to trigger the event under controlled conditions.
Right, to see if it's caused by, say, a rare tumor or some other underlying metabolic problem. This is so far removed from elective wellness fasting. It's very precise medical science.
Okay, so now let's make the jump. We're moving past these required 12-hour fasts and into those prolonged periods. Anything above 24 hours, that's when the body has to make a really dramatic physiological shift just to keep going.
That's right. Once the easy access glucose is gone, the glycogen stored in your liver and muscles, the body has a bit of a panic moment.
Okay.
In that initial phase of a longer fast, your body relies very heavily on a process called gluconeogenesis.
Which means new sugar creation, right?
Yeah.
Making new sugar from things that aren't sugar.
Precisely. And this is where the popular narrative often gets it wrong. To fuel the central nervous system, which primarily needs glucose, the body starts breaking down proteins, off air, from lean tissue.
From muscle.
From muscle. The source material highlights this just brutal calculation. In the early stages of fasting, roughly 2/3 of the weight you lose is lean muscle mass, not fat.
2/3.
Yeah.
That's a powerful data point.
Yeah.
And a huge contradiction to the idea that fasting immediately equals fat burning.
It is. The body is essentially cannibalizing its own functional tissue muscle because that's the fastest, easiest way to get the amino acid building blocks it needs for that new glucose.
It's a costly survival strategy.
A very costly one. However, as the fast goes on, the body starts to realize this isn't sustainable, and this is when that profound metabolic shift
The
happens.
famous shift everyone talks about.
Ketosis.
When the energy deficit continues, the metabolism switches gears dramatically. The liver ramps up the production of ketone bodies from your stored fat reserves.
And these ketones, they can fuel the brain. They can. These ketone bodies are able to cross the blood-brain barrier and start replacing glucose as the primary fuel source for the central nervous system. It's the ultimate evolutionary adaptation.
So this is what finally allows the body to spare that vital muscle mass.
It gets much smarter about conservation. That initial terrible 2-to-1 ratio of lean mass to fat loss dramatically improves. Our sources note that after this gluconeogenic phase, the ratio of body fat loss to lean tissue loss stabilizes at roughly 7-to-6.
7-to-6, so almost 1-to-1. That's a massive shift from the initial 2-to-1 lean mass loss. That detail alone should inform every conversation about how long you fast for.
It should. It shows the body adapts to prioritize using its huge fat stores once it settles into ketosis, but you have to push past that initial muscle wasting phase.
And this physiological reality is why, when we look at the evidence for weight loss, the data often favors longer periods. The sources really zero in on alternate day fasting, or ADF.
ADF seems to be the one with the most clinical research behind it for sustained weight loss.
How is it defined?
It's defined pretty rigorously. You alternate a 24-hour fast day, where you eat less than 25% of your usual energy needs, with a 24-hour non-fasting or feast day.
Okay.
And multiple systematic reviews from recent years consistently show that ADF is associated with significant reductions in body weight, BMI, and it improves cardiovascular and metabolic biomarkers in overweight or obese adults.
So it works about as well as simple, continuous calorie restriction, just on a different schedule.
Exactly. It's effective. But here's the critical distinction that often gets lost in the wellness space. The source material contains a huge caveat. There's very little sound evidence to suggest that intermittent fasting periods shorter than 24 hours, so your classic 168 time-restricted eating, are effective for sustained weight loss in obese adults.
That really challenges the popular belief that just squeezing your eating window is enough. It suggests that to force that deep metabolic switch, you need to push the body beyond what it just experiences overnight.
The duration really matters. If you only fast for 12 or 14 hours, you're generally only hitting that early phase where you're burning expensive muscle tissue before you refuel. To maximize that 7-to-6 fat to lean ratio, you really need to reach ketosis, which takes longer.
Fascinating. Now, just briefly, let's touch on mental health before we move to the risks. The reviews mentioned improved alertness, mood, well-being.
Yeah, these findings are generally positive. They suggest a psychological benefit, maybe related to the mental clarity some people report with ketosis, or maybe just the discipline of the practice itself.
But what about the ultimate claim, the longevity claim, the promise of a longer life?
This is where we have to be extremely cautious. Despite all the excitement around fasting and longevity, the scientific consensus detailed in our sources is unequivocal.
And that is?
There is currently no sound clinical evidence that fasting can promote longevity or extend lifespan in humans. The animal studies are promising, sure, but translating that to human life extension is, well, it remains purely theoretical. We have to be transparent about that.
That clarity on the limitations, that's a powerful foundation. But now we have to address the risks. Because when fasting is prolonged or mismanaged, especially when you reintroduce food, the consequences are incredibly dangerous.
This is the most serious risk associated with severe nutritional deprivation. It's called refeeding syndrome.
Refeeding syndrome.
It's a severe, potentially fatal metabolic disturbance that is triggered not by the fast itself, but by the reintroduction of calories.
It sounds so counterintuitive that the cure for starvation can actually be deadly. How soon can this happen?
It's most associated with prolonged malnutrition, but it can start after as little as 4 to 5 days without food, or even with less severe deficits if the person is already malnourished. The core mechanism is a sudden, dramatic shift in cellular metabolism.
Walk us through that shift. What happens when the body, which has been surviving on fat, suddenly gets a rush of carbs?
Well, when you reintroduce glucose, the body rapidly switches from using fat and protein to fueling itself with carbs. This triggers a massive release of insulin. And this insulin spike drives the rapid synthesis of glycogen, fat, and protein inside the cells, which is what you want, except this process is incredibly enzyme intensive.
And those enzymes need cofactors to work.
Precisely. The process requires huge quantities of certain electrolytes, phosphate, potassium, and magnesium. The cellular machinery just pulls these electrolytes out of the bloodstream way too quickly.
So the body is creating healthy tissue inside the cells, but at the cost of dangerously depleting the electrolyte balance in the blood, which is essential for, well, everything.
Yes. The resulting severe drop in phosphate, potassium, and magnesium is what causes refeeding syndrome. And the effects are systemic and catastrophic. You're looking at severe neurological symptoms, confusion, seizures. You see respiratory failure because the diaphragm and respiratory muscles seize up. And most critically, you face severe cardiac dysfunction and arrhythmias because the heart can't maintain its rhythm without proper potassium levels.
Which explains why the sources emphasize that prolonged fasts require medical supervision during the refeeding phase to monitor those electrolytes hourly and supplement them before they crash.
It's really the only safe way. And beyond refeeding syndrome, the sources confirm that even without refeeding, the act of prolonged fasting itself causes significant mineral depletion.
What are the immediate concerns there?
Drastic decreases in sodium, potassium, and magnesium. This can lead directly to hyponatremia, dangerously low sodium levels, which, like refeeding, can cause neurological and cardiac issues, especially swelling of the brain.
This is why a lot of modern control fasting protocols include non-caloric electrolyte supplements, right? To try and offset these losses.
That's the attempt, yes. It's a necessary mitigation strategy if you're undertaking a fast long enough to deplete those minerals.
And finally, a risk that surprised me because it involves fat metabolism, an increased risk of gallstones. Why does not eating cause this? I always associated gallstones with a high-fat diet.
It's a really compelling paradox, and it's a two-part problem. First, the gallbladder only contracts to release bile when it detects fat in the small intestine. When you fast, there's no fat intake, so there's no signal.
So the bile just sits in the gallbladder, stagnant.
Exactly. This stasis causes the bile to become overconcentrated with cholesterol. Second, because you're in a state of rapid weight loss, your body is mobilizing huge amounts of fat from storage. The liver processes this fat, and in doing so, it secretes extra cholesterol into the bile.
So you have stagnant bile that's also supersaturated with cholesterol.
And that combination significantly increases the risk of cholesterol stone formation.
That is a clear physiological consequence. Okay, we've seen the strict, unforgiving rules of the body's chemistry. But now we have to look at what happens when human will overrides those rules entirely, shifting from metabolic risk to monumental political power.
This transition is startling, isn't it? The simple act of voluntary abstinence becomes perhaps the most potent form of nonviolent resistance we have, the hunger strike.
Right. It's a calculated political statement, a protest used to bring public attention to a cause or to put moral and political pressure on an authority.
And the sources categorize this as distinct from a spiritual fast, though they do overlap. The spiritual fast is about personal transformation, while the hunger strike is aimed outward for social or political change.
Let's look at the historical figures who understood this power best, starting with Mahatma Gandhi.
Gandhi mastered the use of the fast as a political tool. He undertook several long fasts, often using his personal suffering to pressure the British Raj into policy changes, or even to pressure the Indian people to change their own social behaviors, like protesting the caste system.
His fasts were never just about hunger. They were moral warfare.
They absolutely were. Gandhi leveraged his immense moral authority. When he put his life on the line, it didn't just worry the British, it caused huge popular distress among Indians, creating a political situation that became untenable for the colonial government. He effectively transformed private pain into public, irresistible political leverage.
For a demonstration of just extreme physical endurance combined with political commitment, the 1981 Irish hunger strike is, it's perhaps the most chilling example in modern history.
This strike, staged by Irish Republican prisoners in Northern Ireland, was a protest against the withdrawal of their special category status, which basically recognized them as political prisoners rather than common criminals.
And they were fasting for specific rights, like wearing their own clothes and refusing prison work.
Very specific, non-negotiable demands, and they put their lives on the line for them. The duration of their fasts is almost unbelievable. The strike leader, Bobby Sands, died after 66 days without food.
66 days.
And the emotional and political climax happened when Sands, while he was starving in his prison cell, was actually elected to the British Parliament. Imagine the global attention that generated.
Wow. That act, winning an election while starving to death, it must have transformed the protest into an international human rights issue.
It did. And the sheer physiological duration is staggering. In total, 10 men died during this strike, surviving without food for periods ranging from 46 days up to 73 days. When we talk about the metabolic switch, these men push that physics to the absolute limit, deploying their bodies as the final instrument of political dissent.
That demonstrates the power of the fast aimed externally. But Cesar Chavez showed how it could be aimed internally, blending social justice with personal spiritual transformation.
Chavez, the American labor leader, undertook several spiritual fasts. A notable one was a 25-day fast in 1968. He made it very clear that this fast was to promote nonviolence within the United Farm Workers movement. He was worried the movement was getting too angry.
So he was fasting not against an external enemy, but to cleanse and refocus his own movement.
Exactly. He regarded the act of fasting as a deeply personal and spiritual transformation, linking his Catholic faith directly to the moral imperative of his social justice work. It was a preparation for ethical leadership.
If political fasting marks moments of crisis, religious fasting seems to provide the foundational rhythm for so much of human life. Nearly every major world religion incorporates it.
It does. It's used as a central act of spiritual purification, penance, or empathy. Let's start with Judaism, which has fasts of varying lengths and the strictness.
Oh.
The two most significant are Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and Tisha B'Av, which commemorates the destruction of the holy temples. Both are 25-hour fasts, from sunset to nightfall the next day. Observers abstain from all food and liquid.
And the purpose of Yom Kippur is intense self-reflection and atonement, right?
Absolutely. The other 4 lesser fasts last from dawn until nightfall, so their length varies depending on the time of year. They often commemorate historical calamities.
Moving to Christianity, Lent is the most recognized period, but the rules are highly specific and they vary.
In the Catholic Church, modern practice separates abstinence from fasting. Abstinence means refraining from meat on Fridays, Ash Wednesday, and Good Friday. Fasting is more about quantity 1 simple meal and 2 smaller snacks that don't add up to a full meal.
And this is observed on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday.
Correct, by those between the ages of 18 and 59. The purpose is penance and solidarity with the poor.
In Lutheranism,
It's similar. Lutheranism also advocates for fasting during times like Lent, especially Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, often defining the fast as one simple, meatless meal. The emphasis is on spiritual discipline.
the sources also detail the Eucharistic fast.
Yes, this is a beautiful example of ritualistic anticipation. In the Latin Church today, it means taking nothing but water or medicine for 1 hour before receiving the Eucharist. Historically, it was much longer, from midnight until reception. It's meant to heighten the sense of reverence.
Of course, we have to talk about Islam's practice during Ramadan, one of the 5 pillars of the faith.
The fast of Ramadan requires complete abstinence from consuming any food or liquid, including water, from the break of dawn until sunset for the entire lunar month.
The abstinence from water, especially in hot climates, shows just how intense the devotion is. What's the core spiritual purpose?
It's multifaceted, developing self-control, deepening spiritual awareness, seeking forgiveness, and crucially fostering empathy for those who are poor or starving. The communal aspects, like the pre-dawn and sunset meals, weave it deeply into the fabric of Muslim life.
Let's briefly cover a few other faiths to show how pervasive this is.
Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints typically abstain from food and drink for 2 consecutive meals on the first Sunday of each month. And the money they save is donated as a fast offering to help those in need.
So the fast is an act of community support.
It is. Additionally, the Baha'i faith observes a 19-day fast from sunrise to sunset in March. And of course, fasting is a crucial feature of ascetic traditions in Hinduism and Buddhism, used to aid in meditation and detachment.
We've covered the complexity of the metabolic rules and the immense power of the spiritual and political expressions of fasting. But as with any practice that offers purification or transformation, there's a shadow side.
Yeah, historical exploitation and a lot of pervasive pseudoscience.
This brings us to the most persistent marketing myth surrounding fasting. The idea of detoxification.
Cleansing the body. Right, it's the ultimate selling point for juice fasts and cleanses, the need to flush out the toxins from modern life.
And what do our sources say about that?
They explicitly call this idea a marketing myth with almost no scientific basis. It's crucial to ground this in reality. The human body is not a machine that accumulates sludge and needs a special juice to restart it.
Our bodies are already doing the cleaning, constantly.
Exactly. We have these marvelously developed built-in mechanisms. The liver is the primary detoxification engine, and the kidneys ensure constant excretion of waste. The idea that a specific fasting regimen is needed to supplement these tireless processes is it's inaccurate.
Let's pivot to the history of these claims. The early 20th century, the Progressive Era, saw an explosion of writers promoting fasting as a universal cure, often with devastating results.
This era was full of interest in natural hygiene. But no one was more sensationally prolific than the writer Upton Sinclair, who authored The Fasting Cure in 1911.
And the claims in that book are truly shocking now. What did he promise?
Sinclair asserted that fasting could cure practically all diseases. He didn't just list common ailments, he specifically included serious systemic diseases like cancer and syphilis. He recommended it for everything except tuberculosis.
That is a textbook example of quackery.
It is. And while Sinclair's writings were harmful, the next historical example shows this went beyond bad advice to outright criminal danger. We have to talk about Linda Hazard, the starvation doctor.
Okay.
She practiced in the early 1900s, claiming to cure diseases through ultra-strict, prolonged fasts at her sanitarium. Her patients were put on such restricted diets, sometimes just a thin broth, that they suffered severe malnutrition, and many of them died.
And she was responsible for dozens of deaths.
The source material is clear that she was responsible for the deaths of more than 40 patients. She was eventually convicted of manslaughter and served a brief prison sentence. She weaponized fasting, turning it into a deadly instrument for personal gain. It's a terrifying warning.
That context is so important. It highlights why, even a century ago, the medical community was deeply skeptical of these fads.
Indeed. The physician Morris Fishbein, writing in 1932, listed fasting as a clear example of a dangerous fad diet. His commentary was direct. Prolonged fasting is never necessary and invariably does harm.
To wrap up our deep dive, let's just quickly categorize the sheer variety of methods and schedules people use today. It's become so complex.
It has. You see distinctions based on what's consumed. Water fasting, juice fasting, and the potentially dangerous dry fasting with no food or drink.
And the schedules range from the symbolic to the ultra-restrictive.
We have time-restricted feeding like the classic 168. We have alternate day fasting, which is clinically supported. Then there's the 5.2 method and the highly restrictive 1 meal a day, or OMAD. It just reflects this ongoing human search for discipline and metabolic control.
We have completed the journey of fasting. We've moved from the microscopic cellular demands, understanding why the body initially sacrifices muscle before achieving that 7.6 fat-to-lean ratio, all the way through the immense moral pressure of the hunger strike and into the precise rhythms of global spiritual life.
What's most striking is that persistent duality. Fasting is governed by precise, predictable, and frankly unforgiving scientific rules, demanding medical awareness of risks like refeeding syndrome. And yet, its greatest power is entirely immaterial. It's cultural, ethical, and political.
It's the ultimate tension, isn't it? The body demanding sustenance and the human spirit demanding justice or atonement or purification, and finding its expression in withholding that core requirement for life.
And this brings us to the final provocative thought for you, the learner. The data tells us that to achieve the most desirable metabolic outcomes, like maximizing that 7.6 fat-to-lean ratio, we need to push past that 24-hour mark. But the historical examples, like the 10 Irish hunger strikers who endured 46 to 73 days without food for a political ideal, they show that the human commitment to a cause vastly exceeds the body's calculated physiological threshold.
That suggests that while we can precisely quantify the physics of survival, the true deep dive of fasting is often found outside the science lab. It reveals the extraordinary, almost terrifying capacity of human willpower when faced with deeply held convictions or social injustice. What stands out to you about this profound human practice? We will see you next time on The Deep Dive.